Araṇavibhaṅga Sutta, the analysis of non-conflict. So have I heard. At one time, the Buddha was staying near Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. There the Buddha addressed the mendicants. Mendicants, Venerable Sir, they replied. The Buddha said this. Mendicants, I shall teach you the analysis of non-conflict. This is Araṇavibhaṅga. Listen and pay close attention. I will speak. Yes, sir, they replied. The Buddha said this. So just to point out, this is a very standard introduction, isn't it, to almost any of the suttas in Majjhima Nikāya. And it's not there's no sort of extra special additional elements, it's just a straightforward introduction. The Buddha would always invite people to listen up before he would give a teaching. And I can just imagine, can't you, the ways in which he would wait for the right receptivity, the right moment to actually begin to teach. Are they prepared for this Dhamma teaching? And so he would give a short preamble in this way. And also, of course, we always get to find out, where the teaching was given. More teachings than in any other place happened here at Savatthi, at Anathapindika's park. Even to this day, it's a Buddhist pilgrimage site. It's a beautiful big park, and there would have been quite a lot of mendicants living in that area of Savatthi, and particularly in this monastic boundary. So the Buddha spent many rainy seasons, many vasas at Savatthi. A lot of teachings come from this place. Okay, and then he begins. Don't indulge in sensual pleasures, which are low, crude, ordinary, ignoble, and pointless. And don't indulge in self-mortification, which is painful, ignoble, and pointless. Avoiding these two extremes, the realized one woke up by understanding the middle way of practice, which gives vision and knowledge and leads to peace, direct knowledge, awakening, and extinguishment. So just to pause here, we can see that this is, in a way, a sort of potted version of the Buddha's very first teaching, isn't it? The Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, where the Buddha is really pointing out we need to find the middle ground between the extremes of following pleasure or following pain. We need to find a balanced way of practicing. And this is really significant for us, isn't it? Because it's not actually that difficult to veer off into one direction or another. So let's notice the Buddha describes sense pleasures in this quite powerful way. They are low, they are coarse, they are ignoble, they are pointless. And the ascetic practices, if we're overly indulging in painful practices, the Buddha simply says, well, this is also ignoble and pointless. And of course, it's painful too. So how to find the middle way? He goes on, know what it means to flatter and to rebuke. Knowing these, avoid them and just teach Dhamma. Very helpful pointer, isn't it? Not just in terms of teaching Dhamma, but just generally, we can consider this remarkable teaching. Can we avoid, should we avoid, is it good to avoid flattery and chastisement? We might think, well, flattery is quite good. I mean, it's encouraging each other, it's positive feedback and so forth. We can give ourselves encouragement, not to create ourselves, but rather just to bring up some kind of positive state of mind. Sometimes when we're feeling a bit like dragged down, or there might be a tendency to be despondent, we can actually encourage ourselves. Why is flattery not skillful thing. So I think we'll find out a bit more about that. Know what it means to flatter. Know what it means to rebuke. Knowing these, avoid them and just teach Dhamma. Know how to assess different kinds of pleasure. And knowing this, pursue inner bliss. Don't talk behind people's backs. And don't speak sharply in their presence. Don't speak hurriedly. Don't insist on local terminology and don't override normal usage. This is the recitation passage for the analysis of non-conflict. So just a quick comment here to say that he's actually giving like a summary of the entire teaching here at the beginning, and then he's going to elaborate. And oftentimes he will do this in the suttas. And oftentimes also the Buddha might give a teaching in this way, give a short, précis summary of a teaching, and then he might go away and invite one of the other mendicants, or one of the other mendicants might be asked by their fellow samanas to elaborate, please, on this teaching of the Buddha. So it's quite interesting to see here we have this summary. And we're lucky in this case, the Buddha himself is going to continue to share on this topic. So the first point, don't indulge in sensual pleasures which are low, crude, ordinary, ignoble, and pointless. And don't indulge in self-mortification, which is painful, ignoble, and pointless. So we're coming back to this first point. The Buddha goes on, that's what I said, but why did I say it? Pleasure linked to sensuality is low, crude, ordinary, ignoble, and pointless. Indulging in such happiness is a principle beset by pain, harm, stress, and fever, and it is the wrong way. Breaking off such indulgence is a principle free from harm, pain, stress, and fever, and it is the right way. Indulging in self-mortification is painful, ignoble, and pointless. It is a principle beset by pain, harm, stress, and fever, and it is the wrong way. Breaking off such indulgence is a principle free of pain, harm, stress, and fever, and it is the right way. Don't indulge in sensual pleasures, which are low, crude, ordinary, ignoble, and pointless. And don't indulge in self-mortification, which is painful, ignoble, and pointless. That is what I said. And this is why I say it. Avoiding these two extremes, the realized one woke up by understanding the middle way of practice, which gives vision and knowledge and leads to peace, direct knowledge, awakening, and extinguishment. That's what I said. But why did I say it? It is simply this Noble Eightfold Path. That is, right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right immersion. Avoiding these two extremes, the realized one woke up by understanding the middle way of practice, which gives vision and knowledge and leads to peace, direct knowledge, awakening, and extinguishment. That is what I said, and this is why I said it. So it's an interesting refrain here, isn't it? That is what I said, and this is why I said it. It's quite interesting. It's like emphasizing the points again and again, and also perhaps a pause between these different expressions of this teaching. So the Buddha's again coming back to pointing out the middle way between the two extremes, and how painful the two extremes are. I find this a very helpful reminder. If we follow sense desires, it's painful, it's harmful, it's ignoble, it's a waste of time. So this is a really strong and very definite teaching here from the Buddha, which maybe we can remember when we start to notice ourselves being caught up and drawn and attached to sense pleasures, just to consider this teaching. And mortification, self-torment in different ways, is also painful and ignoble and pointless. So the middle way then, the Buddha goes on to say, is simply this Eightfold Path. If we practice the 5 precepts, right speech, right livelihood, then this is the middle way. Also developing wisdom, developing right view, right intention, harmlessness, the intention to renunciation, to letting go of sense pleasures, or the attachment to sense pleasures, and developing our practice, our meditation practice, right concentration, right mindfulness, right effort. So all these factors, this is the middle way that the Buddha is pointing to. So what a beautiful summary, actually, of the entire teaching of the Buddha. And as I said, this is the very first teaching of the Buddha, in essence, that he gave to his 5 spiritual companions, the first time he really spoke on Dhamma. So this is being repeated here as the beginning part of this beautiful teaching on avoiding conflict. Know what it means to flatter and to rebuke. Knowing these, avoid them and just teach Dhamma. Just speak on Dhamma. This is what I said, but why did I say it? How is there flattering and rebuking without teaching Dhamma? In speaking like this, some are rebuked. Pleasure linked to sensuality is low, crude, ordinary, ignoble, and pointless. All those who indulge in such happiness are beset by pain, harm, stress, and fever, and they are practicing the wrong way. In speaking like this, some are flattered. Pleasure linked to sensuality is low, crude, ordinary, ignoble, and pointless. All those who've broken off such indulgence are free of pain, harm, stress, and fever, and they're practicing the right way. So those who are able to follow this teaching, those who are able to let go of sense pleasures, who are able to free themselves up or begin to free themselves up from this attachment to pleasure, they can feel flattered by such a teaching. And likewise, in speaking like this, some are rebuked. Indulging in self-mortification is painful, ignoble, and pointless. All those who indulge in it are beset by pain, harm, stress, and fever, and they're practicing the wrong way. In speaking like this, some are flattered. Indulging in self-mortification is painful, ignoble, and pointless. All those who've broken off such indulgence are free of pain, harm, stress, and fever, and practicing the right way. And in speaking like this, some are rebuked. All those who've not given up the fetters of rebirth are beset by pain, harm, stress, and fever, and they're practicing the wrong way. In speaking like this, some are flattered. All those who've given up the fetters of rebirth are free of pain, harm, stress, and fever, and they're practicing the right way. That's how there is flattering and rebuking without teaching Dhamma. So I think we can gather from this that if we speak on the teachings of the Buddha in terms of individuals, then people may take the teachings in such a way that they will feel criticized or flattered by the simple Dhamma teachings. So when the teachings are personalized, then the response can be tainted by the sense of self coming in. I'm doing well, I'm not doing well. And it's all about me and you, right and wrong, us and them. So this is a really interesting and helpful point. So he goes on, how is there neither flattering nor rebuking, just teaching Dhamma, just speaking on Dhamma? You don't say, pleasure linked to sensualities, low, crude, ordinary, ignoble and pointless, and all those who indulge in such happiness are beset by pain, harm, stress and fever, and they're practicing the wrong way. Rather, by saying this, you just teach Dhamma. And here's how to say it. The indulgence is a principle beset by pain, harm, stress and fever, and it is the wrong way. Again, you don't say pleasure linked to sensualities, low, crude, ordinary, ignoble and pointless. All those who've broken off such indulgence are free of pain, harm, stress and fever and practicing the right way. Rather, by saying this, you just teach Dhamma. You say, breaking off the indulgence is a principle free of pain, harm, stress and fever, and it is the right way, and so forth. The Buddha goes on to give the same example in relation to self-mortification. And finally, he also gives the example of not saying all those who've not given up the fetters of rebirth are beset by pain, harm, stress and fever and practicing the wrong way. You say, to just teach Dhamma, you would say, when the fetter of rebirth is not given up, rebirth is also not given up. This is how there's neither flattering nor rebuking, just teaching Dhamma, just speaking on Dhamma. Know what it means to flatter and to rebuke, and knowing these, avoid them, and just teach Dhamma. This is what I said, and this is why I said it. So here we are, here's the explanation. And I do find this very helpful. And I note that in the Pali language, in the scriptural language, which will be very close to the languages that the Buddha would have used when he was teaching way back 2,600 years ago. In these languages, in the Pali language, there's a tremendous emphasis on this kind of way of speaking, which is more objective. And there's less emphasis on speaking personally. So there's much less use of pronouns. But actually, the Buddha's pointing to this as something to be conscious of, something to consider when we speak on Dhamma. So when we speak on truth, when we share truth, when we speak on spiritual practice, when we perhaps even, when we speak generally, to try to consider how, if we speak in terms of persons, we might be flattering some and rebuking others. We might be causing some kind of conflict between people. A crude example would be, say, you point to somebody in the community and praise them highly for what they've done today. And we might think, well, that's really nice to do that. But actually, other members of the community who've been working hard and making right effort and practicing well might feel a little despondent. Or maybe they might actually even have a little trace of jealousy or envy or aversion towards the one who's getting praised or the one who's praising. So I think actually we can take it at this level and consider how our speech, even when flattering, never mind rebuking, which is kind of obvious. We can obviously understand how personal rebukes can be a cause of suffering. But even with flattery, how our words can cause suffering for others. Particularly, I would say, in teaching Dhamma, this is a really important principle, not to speak about personal attributes, but to speak generally on what is true, what is wholesome, what is unwholesome. We can really make these kind of distinctions. It's the qualities, not the people. That is, in fact, reality, isn't it? That is more real, to see that it's the sinner, not the sinner, that we want to really work with, not to create people where there are simply these wholesome or unwholesome dhammas. It helps us to see more clearly if we look at things in this way, and if we can express this through our speech. How helpful is that? How peaceful, how true. Feedback can be received. It is possible to receive feedback, and it is possible to give feedback in a way that's really acceptable, isn't it? And how to find that way, how to get to that way of speaking that is not the person doesn't feel personally judged or blamed, but rather you're sharing some helpful information here. This is a huge area, isn't it, for us to explore, and we can only really touch the surface today. The Buddha was very clear that self-mortification is veering off the path to a certain extent. However, he did allow the monks and nuns to practice certain renunciant practices that were considered to be suitable. There are the Dhutanga practices. There are 13 of them that we're allowed to take on if we wish. They don't involve harming the body in any way. They don't involve pushing us beyond our limits, but it's things like having one meal a day that we collect on alms round, or sleeping out in nature rather than in a building, wearing coarse robes or rag robes. When our robes get a little bit frayed or a little bit damaged, one can keep the same robes and patch them and just keep wearing the same ones for much longer. All sorts of ascetic practices that were allowed. And Mahakassapa was practicing, I think, all the Dhutanga, but this was acceptable. And he didn't veer beyond that allowance from the Buddha. In this way, he was following the Vinaya, within which there is this latitude, there is this scope. And many, many monks today, in Thailand, will practice the Dhutanga practices when they're young and fit and they're able to do so. It's not discouraged. It's also not necessary. It very much depends on the person. The Buddha did say that the Dhutanga practices can be very valuable for people who have a lot of sense desire, a lot of greed, a lot of passion. They're particularly helpful for such people who have a lot of aversion, who are working more with negative mind states. It's not so valuable for them. It's good for them to take care of their bodies, take care of their minds, and work with the aversion in ways that are less challenging. It can be encouraging for people to be told how well they've done or thanked for doing a good job and so forth. It's hard to say that that's a bad thing. It's quite nice to praise and encourage people. And there are places in the Buddha's teachings where he encourages and praises people. He really is pointing, though, in this sutta to what is the praise for? Well, the praise is for qualities such as generosity or making effort, selfless service. One can praise these things, and I can appreciate how actually when we speak more generally about how much we appreciate these good qualities, then those who have been manifesting those good qualities will tend to feel praised. And those who are not will tend to think, oh, maybe I can develop these good qualities as well. But it's not actually singling out people in an overt way. One can use praise in a way to encourage everybody. But I'm interested in this emphasis the Buddha's giving us on not singling out individuals as much as bringing up appreciation for good qualities. And I wonder if that could be even more effective and helpful. And remembering the sutta is all about avoiding conflict. So whether it's more harmonizing to be speaking about qualities rather than persons. How do we give negative feedback without actually rebuking somebody, without, say, shaming them or humiliating them or just leaving them in a state of feeling despondent or feeling self-critical and so forth? A very interesting question. I'm curious about applying this teaching then. So to speak about qualities rather than persons. Could we do that? When giving negative feedback, could we speak about how how challenging it is for me when I can't seem to notice that certain things are happening, when certain things are not happening that I was expecting to happen, how that feels for me. And can you help me with that? I really don't know, but I'm curious about it. And I wonder if you could, let's just contemplate, basically. Let's contemplate these teachings. And with a lot of the Buddhist teachings, I find it's so helpful just to let them sort of percolate, in the system and see how that might be able to inform and support how we relate to the people around us in work, situation, family life, in community life. How do we find a way to give negative feedback with love, with precision, getting just the truth right out there to the other persons, giving them the information that they need in the most generous, loving way that we can, without blaming and judging the person, but just saying how certain qualities are really a bit difficult to work with, or certain qualities we need to look at together and see if we can find a way to overcome them. I mean, the Buddha actually gave lots of wonderful teachings about how to give feedback and when. And so what a call to be able to bring these qualities to the fore when giving feedback. So the qualities the Buddha described as, do I have a heart of loving kindness? Is my speech gentle? Is it true? Is it timely? Can it be received? So it may not be well received, but I can speak with a heart of loving kindness. I can speak the truth, and I can have this person's welfare in the foreground in my mind. When these qualities are in place, the best we can do is to enable a good result. How much are we responsible for? Well, we're responsible for our own inner experience, our own reactions, our own ideas, our own thoughts and feelings, and that we can work with. And when it comes to relating feedback to others, we do the best we can. And it is possible sometimes that you have a heart of loving kindness, you give the true and valuable and beneficial feedback, and then the other person has some kind of reaction. Well, we also need to know how not to take other people's suffering on board and to make that kind of distinction, do our best and stay here. Usadanancha, apasadanancha. We need to tease out the actual meaning. We're going to come back to that. How to receive feedback also. If there's flattery, if there's rebuke, how do we receive that? How do we make use of that? Surely in the same way, there's an encouragement to, extract the Dhamma from this. What is of value? What is beneficial? What is true? What can I take as a teaching here? And anything else, I can just set that aside. To do with inflation, isn't it? Lifting above. When we're trying to translate from the Pali into the English, it's very difficult to capture the exact meaning, but we could consider it as something like making something above the level or putting something below the level, to make the distinction between authentic feedback that is praising or not so appreciative of something, and to do this lifting up or putting down. There's a difference, isn't there? To understand just exactly what the Buddha's pointing to. There's a sense of exaggeration, maybe, a sense of over something that's not completely genuine and true in the way in which we relate to people, in these ways of speaking, to flatter or to rebuke. Let's consider how helpful to come back to the Pali before we give feedback, to see if the time is right, if the heart is in the right place. And absolutely, the most significant and important quality is to have, at least as far as we know, to be speaking the truth, to have authenticity behind what we're saying. Sometimes what we have to say may not be well received. It may not be pleasant for the hearer. And in these cases, we need to exercise caution, but be willing to speak, try and find the right time. The conflict that can arise, so much of it is to do with circling around and involved with the sense of self. And if we can let go of taking our lives personally, then we can really open to the truth, the way things are, free up and receive, be like a rag, mop up. Mop up the messes. As soon as we start to identify, we can start to get caught up. And both giving flattery or rebuke, really discern and avoid flattery and rebuke in the way that we've come to understand it through looking at the Pali in this sutta. But should we receive flattery or rebuke? High praises. Can we receive praise? Can we receive feedback without getting caught up and identifying with it? This is a good reflection for us all, isn't it? Intention is so key. People will often pick up on intentionality. It's like reading between the lines, isn't it? It's like what we feel underneath and through the speech that's going on around us. It's what we actually feel often. We pick up on the attitude and the intentionality. And so how helpful it is then to try to imbue our lives in community with loving kindness and let that be our attitude towards one another, bringing loving kindness, bringing compassion. And we can't really go too far wrong. We can still go wrong. We can still make mistakes for sure with our speech. But if I have a heart of loving kindness, even if I slip up verbally, people can often forgive more easily because the intention is, it almost comes across that the intention is not to harm, it's not to hurt and harm here. Know how to assess different kinds of pleasure. Knowing this, pursue inner bliss. That is what I said. But why did I say it? There are these 5 kinds of sensual stimulation. What 5? Sights known by the eye that are likable, desirable, agreeable, pleasant, sensual, and arousing. Sounds known by the ear that are likable, etc. Smells known by the nose, agreeable, pleasant. Tastes known by the tongue, delightful, agreeable. Touches known by the body that are likable, desirable, agreeable, pleasant, sensual, and arousing. These are the 5 kinds of sensual stimulation. The pleasure and happiness that arise from these 5 kinds of sensual stimulation is called sensual pleasure, kama sukha. A filthy, common, ignoble pleasure. Such pleasure should not be cultivated or developed, but should be feared, I say. Now take a mendicant who, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unskillful qualities, enters and remains in the first absorption, first jhana, which has the rapture and bliss born of seclusion, while placing the mind and keeping it connected. As placing of the mind and keeping it connected are stilled, they enter and remain in the second absorption, the third, the fourth jhana. So states of stillness, states of focus, peaceful and sublime states of mind. This is called the pleasure of renunciation, the pleasure of seclusion, the pleasure of peace, the pleasure of awakening, sambodhi. Such pleasure should be cultivated and developed and should not be feared, I say. Know how to assess different kinds of pleasure. Knowing this, pursue inner bliss. That is why I said what I said, and this is why I said it. So there we are, the two different categories of pleasant experience. Sense pleasures through the five sense doors, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. Coarse, ignoble, mundane, ordinary pleasures. And the pleasure of practicing meditation, having let go of desire and aversion, the possibility for the mind to experience real peace and stillness and calm. This kind of pleasure, this kind of blissful experience in meditation where the mind is beginning to settle, the thoughts are less charged, or even they've stopped altogether, and one is able to rest and relax, practice with an object of meditation where the mind is actually able to focus and come to one-pointedness. And the Buddha is saying this kind of pleasure is a pleasure that we can pursue, a pleasure that's worth cultivating, not to be feared. He's really pointing to the path and how through letting go, through renouncing the mundane, the coarse, worldly sense pleasures, how we can actually, through that willingness to renounce worldly pleasures and through the practice of mindfulness, through developing the path factors, we can then experience a more spiritual pleasure, which is something to pursue. In another sutta, the Buddha has told us that pursuing sense pleasures is a source of conflict, potentially source of all the wars, all the horrible, painful, harmful things that happen between people due to pursuing, cultivating, making much of sense pleasures. The whole way of practice, all the teachings of the Buddha, his invitation to us is to listen, lend ear, hear the Dhamma, and then put it into practice, try it out. And so it's really like an experiment for us to discern the truth of these teachings or not, to investigate them. We will be attached to and delighting in sense pleasures until we find that there are actually states of mind that are more pleasant, which are peaceful, which are not depending on sense input. And this is something we really need to discover for ourselves, don't we? And it's a process. There is a certain leap of faith, I think, for the monastic, which is to renounce quite often, probably before we have fully let go of certain pleasures, we renounce and we see what that's like. And how does that work? How does that help or not? And oftentimes we discover actually it's really helpful to renounce certain behaviors, renounce certain pleasures. It frees us up. And so there's a kind of leap of faith that can happen, or it can happen through the experience of our practice that we notice things like, oh, I'm just not so interested now in spending so much time, say, spending so much time making beautiful gourmet meals. Actually, oh, why don't I spend less time cooking and I can spend more time meditating and see how that is? And it's just a very natural progression. There's a place for making effort and there's a place for mindfully renouncing things to see how we can benefit from that. But there's also this very experiential way of developing our practice through truly discerning what gives us more happiness, what gives us more peace, what gives us more joy. It's a very beautiful journey to see how we can slowly but surely let go of so many compulsions and delights even, and ways of behaving, and come to experience having a lot more time, a lot more space, and noticing that often real happiness comes from doing less, having less.